Hello and welcome to Investment Insight. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's break down what's happening in the markets today in a clear and simple way.
Yeah, and today's topic is a big one. It's really shifting how we think about the whole global system.
It really is. I mean, usually when we think about the most dangerous weapons in global trade, we picture, aircraft carriers in the Middle East or maybe a massive tariff on steel imports.
Right, something very physical.
Exactly, something physical. But according to recent analysis, looking at the data right now in early May 2026, the biggest weapon is actually just a piece of banking paperwork in Beijing.
Which is wild, right? It completely flips how we usually understand international conflict. Like, we're literally wired to look at the physical goods.
Yeah, we want to see the giant cargo ships stacked with colorful shipping containers.
Right, or those endless pipelines pumping oil across a desert. This is
Yeah.
very mechanical, very visible. We just want to see the product moving from point A to point B.
But tracking the financial data, the real battleground in global trade right now is not on the water at all. It's buried deep in compliance departments, right? In banking software and these really obscure legal codes.
It's all invisible plumbing.
Exactly. We are looking at a fundamental shakeup of how the world does business. So our mission for this deep dive today is to unpack how a seemingly small bureaucratic dispute over Iranian oil is actually this giant tug of war over global financial power.
And it features the current U.S. president, Donald Trump, and Chinese leadership. It is incredibly high stakes.
Yeah, and it is happening right now, and it genuinely affects the entire global economy, especially if you are just starting to learn about economics. This is the perfect real-world example to look at.
Absolutely. And, this whole scenario was essentially ignited by a very specific, incredibly aggressive legal maneuver that just took place.
Okay, let's unpack this. The inciting incident happened just days ago, right? On May 2, 2026.
Yeah.
China's Ministry of Commerce issued what is called a prohibition order. Now, what's interesting is they didn't broadcast this to the entire global market. They very surgically targeted 5 specific Chinese oil refiners.
Right. And I can jump in with the specifics there because the makeup of these 5 companies is really crucial to understanding the whole strategy.
Yeah, please do. Who we're talking about?
So one of them is this massive globally connected enterprise named Hengli Petrochemical. They are a heavy hitter, like a giant.
Okay.
The other 4 are what the industry calls teapots.
Teapots.
Yeah, teapots. Specifically, we are looking at Shandong Jincheng, Hebei Xinhai, Shuguang Luking, and Shandong Shengxing.
Okay, I have to pause you right there. Teapots. That sounds like something you'd find in a kitchen, not a multi-billion-dollar energy market.
I know, it's a funny name.
What exactly is a teapot refinery, and why do they matter in a massive geopolitical showdown?
It's a great nickname, honestly. We call them teapots because compared to the giant, sprawling, state-owned refineries that the Chinese government runs, these are much, much smaller.
Oh, okay, so they're independent.
Exactly. They're independent, often privately owned, and they're clustered mostly in China's Shandong province. And because they don't have the massive financial backing of the state, they operate on absolutely razor-thin profit margins.
Meaning they have to be scrappy.
Very scrappy. To survive, they have to find the absolute cheapest raw crude oil possible on the global market, refine it, and sell it locally.
Right.
And right now, the cheapest oil available anywhere is heavily sanctioned Iranian crude.
Because Iran has to sell it at a discount, right?
Precisely. They sell it at a massive discount to anyone who is willing to take the legal risk of buying it.
Okay, so to make sure I'm following, the United States has strict sanctions against buying Iranian oil. The U.S. Treasury is basically telling these Chinese companies, you cannot buy this oil or we will cut you off from the global financial system.
That's the threat, yeah.
But then, on May 2nd, the Chinese government hands these 5 specific companies this prohibition order. So let me try a simple analogy for you listening right now. Imagine you're a teenager, right? And you have 2 very strict parents who happen to live in different houses.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Parent A, which is the U.S., says you absolutely cannot talk to a certain friend, Iran. Parent B, China, hands you a written legal order saying if you stop talking to that friend, you are grounded forever. You are trapped.
That is the perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah.
It really highlights the mechanical trap that these companies are in.
It's a lose-lose situation for the businesses.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that for years, countries have complained about U.S. sanctions. They put out angry press releases. They express their outrage at the United Nations. You know the drill.
Yeah, lots of loud talk, but no action.
Right. And then, quietly behind the scenes, Their local companies mostly just comply with the U.S. anyway, because literally nobody wants to lose access to U.S. dollars.
Right, the dollar is king.
But reviewing the geopolitical analysis, this May 2nd order is fundamentally different. This isn't just angry talk. This is the very first real-world, practical deployment of China's anti-foreign sanctions law.
That's a law they initially put on the books a few years ago, right? Back in like 2021, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But they just revised it last month in April 2026 to give it severe, immediate teeth.
Oh, wow.
By issuing this specific prohibition order, China has created a total nightmare legal dilemma. Let's walk through the actual mechanics of how this works on the ground for a second.
Yeah, please.
Say you run one of those teapot refineries. The U.S. threatens you with sanctions, so you panic and you cancel a shipment of Iranian oil.
Because you don't want to get hit by the U.S. Treasury.
Right. But under this newly revised Chinese law, by doing that, you are now actively committing a crime in your home country.
Oh, man.
And it goes way further than just facing a fine from the Chinese government. Under this law, if you comply with the U.S., your own local business partners say the Chinese trucking company you hired to move the refined gas, they can actually sue you in a local Chinese court for the financial damages caused by your compliance.
Wait, really?
Yes, really.
So a local partner can literally take you to court and say, hey, you bowed to American pressure, you canceled the shipment, and because of that, my trucking company lost a ton of money, so I am seizing your assets.
Yes. They can legally cannibalize you in domestic courts.
That is a staggering trap. It's essentially Beijing saying, we're going to make it legally terrifying and financially ruinous for you to listen to the Americans.
Exactly. It's a legal game of chicken.
But honestly, this seems incredibly reckless. Like forcing your own domestic companies, especially a massive player like Hengli, into this legal meat grinder is a huge risk. Why is China willing to push things to the absolute brink over this one specific issue of Iranian oil?
To understand the why, you really have to look at the raw data surrounding China's desperate, fundamental need for energy. They are incredibly vulnerable.
How vulnerable?
Well, according to recent analysis, in 2025, China bought over 80% of Iran's seaborne export oil.
80%?
80%. They're effectively Iran's entire customer base for this product.
Wow.
Furthermore, if you look at their overall energy imports in 2025, about half of China's total oil, refined products, and natural gas came from the Middle East as a whole.
So just to put that in perspective for you listening, that is half of the energy required to run the entire Chinese manufacturing machine.
Yeah.
Every single factory, every shipping truck, every power plant relies on that flow.
And fast forward to right now, the spring of 2026. The world watched a massive conflict erupt in April, which led directly to the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, which is huge news.
For anyone unfamiliar, the Strait of Hormuz is this narrow waterway in the Middle East. A massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply has to pass through this tiny geographic choke point. Right.
With that blocked, China's energy security isn't just threatened, it's practically on life support.
Okay, let me stop you there and push back on this a bit, because something just isn't adding up for me.
Okay, what is it?
If the Middle East is currently a chaotic war zone, right, and the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, making shipping a complete nightmare, wouldn't it just be easier and safer for China to buy their oil from somewhere else entirely?
You would think so, yeah.
Like, why not just buy from Texas or Norway or Canada instead of picking a massive apocalyptic legal fight with the United States over Iranian barrels? Just seems like bad business.
It's a highly logical question, but the physical reality of global oil logistics just doesn't allow for a sudden pivot like that. You simply cannot replace 80% of a major nation's supply overnight.
Why not? Is it just about shipping contracts?
Well, first, yeah, there are long-term shipping contracts that take years to negotiate. But more importantly, there is the actual chemistry of the oil.
The chemistry. Yeah. Refineries are built like custom engines. They are physically engineered to process very specific types of crude oil. Like, some crude is sour and high in sulfur, and some is sweet and light.
Ah, okay.
You can't just take oil pumped from Texas and dump it into a Chinese teapot refinery that was calibrated for Iranian-heavy crude without spending billions of dollars and months of downtime refitting the entire facility.
So it's a physical limitation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like trying to turn a massive cruise ship on a dime in a narrow canal. It just doesn't work.
Okay, so they are physically and chemically locked into this supply chain.
Yes. But there's a second, arguably more explosive reason why China is picking this fight right now. The timeline shows that the U.S. actually escalated the situation first.
Oh, really? Let's look at that timeline then. Walk me through exactly what happened leading up to this May 2nd order.
Right, so back on April 24th, the U.S. Treasury took a massive step. They didn't just issue a stern warning, they officially sanctioned Hengli Petrochemical and roughly 40 shipping companies.
Oh, wow. So they went straight for the big guys.
Exactly. And from China's perspective, this crossed a glaring red line. The U.S. wasn't just slapping the wrists of those small, scrappy teapot refiners anymore. They were openly attacking Hengli, which is a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar private enterprise. It's basically a crown jewel of Chinese industry.
So it became personal for Beijing.
Very much so. To Beijing, this stopped being a tactical argument about the price of oil or the enforcement of sanctions. This became an existential issue of national sovereignty.
Huh, I see. Because if Beijing lets Washington dictate who a company the size of Hengli can or cannot do business with, it sets a precedent that American law basically rules supreme inside Chinese borders.
Exactly. China's leadership felt they had absolutely no choice but to draw a line in the sand to protect their sovereignty.
Right.
But, as intense as this standoff is for the refineries pumping the oil, they actually aren't the ones who are going to suffer the most structural damage here.
Which means we need to talk about the unseen forces driving this conflict. Because if you look past the physical oil barrels, the real shockwave of this event is hitting banks, insurance companies, and trading houses.
Right, the invisible plumbing of the global economy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how are the banks getting dragged into this?
Well, the U.S. strategy here is evolving rapidly. They are moving away from just trying to catch the people buying the physical oil, and they are aggressively targeting the financial infrastructure, moving the money to pay for it.
Moving the money, okay.
For example, a few days after hitting Hengli on April 28th, the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, known as OFAC, sanctioned 35 distinct entities.
Okay.
And they issued a very severe, highly specific warning to banks worldwide about processing fees.
Processing fees, you mean like ATM fees? How does that impact global oil shipments?
No, in this context, we are talking about massive logistical fees like transit tolls.
Oh, I see.
When a giant oil tanker passes through a strait or a canal, it has to pay a toll. The U.S. warning states that banks must freeze these payments if there is even a chance, just a chance, that the transit toll money might eventually reach the Iranian government or the IRGC.
The IRGC. Okay, for those of us who don't spend our days reading intelligence briefings,
Yeah.
what exactly is the IRGC and why does the U.S. care so much if a random transit toll reaches them?
Good question. The IRGC stands for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It is a major branch of the Iranian armed forces, and the U.S. has designated it as a foreign terrorist organization.
Got it.
The U.S. government's position is that the IRGC uses the global financial system to fund militant activities across the Middle East. So by threatening banks that process a simple toll fee, the U.S. is attempting to completely choke off the IRGC's funding pipeline.
Wow, it really is a total shift in strategy. It's like the local police trying to stop a speeding problem on a highway. But instead of just pulling over the cars that are going too fast, the police are now arresting the people working in the toll booths, the mechanics who change the car's oil, and the credit card companies that let the drivers buy gas. They are completely attacking the ecosystem.
That is precisely what is happening. And to understand how terrifying this is for the banking ecosystem, we have to look at the mechanics of U.S. secondary sanctions.
What's the difference between a primary and secondary sanction?
A primary sanction is straightforward. It means a U.S. company cannot do business with Iran. But a secondary sanction means the U.S. government tells a foreign bank, say a massive bank headquartered in Germany or Japan, they say, if you process a single payment for this Iranian oil, we will cut you off from the U.S. financial system entirely.
Which means you lose the ability to clear transactions in U.S. dollars.
Exactly. And for a major international bank, losing access to the U.S. dollar is basically a death sentence.
Yeah, because the dollar runs everything.
Right. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, is the lifeblood of international trade. If you cannot touch the dollar, you cannot participate in the global economy. You go bankrupt.
Wow.
In fact, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned about exactly this dynamic on April 15th, making it abundantly clear that secondary sanctions were fully on the table.
So if I'm sitting on the board of a major international bank in Europe and I see these OFAC warnings, I am going to panic.
Of course you are.
The risk is simply too high. Even if I make millions in fees processing oil trades for China, one single mistake means my entire bank collapses. So I step back. I refuse to touch anything related to Chinese oil imports.
Which is exactly what the U.S. wants.
Right, but nature abhors a vacuum. Someone still has to process the payments for the energy needs of the world's second largest economy.
And that massive vacuum is going to be filled by Chinese state-owned banks. This is where the fragmentation of the global economy really begins. Because unlike a private international bank that relies on global markets, a Chinese state-owned bank's primary mission is to serve the interests of the Chinese state.
That makes sense.
They might not care at all about losing U.S. dollar access if they are entirely backed by the government. They will simply lean heavily into non-dollar payment systems, using their own currency, the yuan, and completely bypass the U.S. banking system.
So we have both sides pulling out their absolute biggest weapons. The U.S. is wielding the nuclear threat of secondary sanctions to freeze the world's money, and China is wielding this new aggressive prohibition order to legally force its companies to keep buying.
It's a massive escalation.
But this raises a major question about the timeline for me. Like, why is this boiling over exactly right now in the first week of May 2026?
Because there is a massive diplomatic deadline looming over all of this. The calendar here is really the key to everything.
Okay, what's on the calendar?
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is scheduled to make an official visit to Beijing on May 14th and 15th.
Right.
And that visit is essentially just the opening act for a highly anticipated major summit in mid-May between U.S. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Oh, wow. Here's where it gets really interesting. The timing of this May 2nd prohibition order cannot be an accident. China is using this legal order as a massive poker chip to bring to the negotiating table.
It is a textbook diplomatic strategy. You deliberately create a high-stakes crisis right before a summit, so you have leverage.
Right. You need something to trade.
Exactly. You manufacture something to trade away, or you use it to project strength. China is showing off its economic pressure toolbox. By deploying this anti-sanctions law just days before Secretary Bessent arrives, they're sending a very clear message.
What's the message?
They want to prove to the Trump administration that U.S. laws do not automatically apply inside Chinese territory.
And observing how the U.S. is reacting right now is honestly fascinating. And we are keeping things strictly impartial here, just looking at the documented diplomatic moves. Secretary Bessent has very strongly publicly criticized China's oil purchases. He's been very vocal about it.
He has.
But interestingly, the Trump administration as a whole has notably held back on a massive official all-out retaliation to China's May 2nd order.
Which tells us a lot about the backroom calculations going on. In the world of international diplomacy, a lack of immediate severe retaliation is almost always a strategic choice.
Because they don't want to blow up the summit.
Exactly. It implies that both leaders recognize how high the stakes are. They're both keeping their powder dry. They are saving this specific volatile issue for the summit table.
Yeah.
It's a high-stakes game of chicken, and neither side wants to accidentally crash the car before they even sit down in the room to negotiate.
It is incredibly dense. And honestly, for anyone trying to run a business or just understand where the world is heading, it can be a lot to keep track of.
Oh, absolutely.
We have teapot refineries, sour crude chemistry, secondary sanctions, and sovereign legal battles. If I'm a small business owner relying on international shipping, how is this clash over banking plumbing going to hit my bottom line tomorrow?
Right.
So what does this all mean? Can you give us some tight, small scope summaries of the core takeaways so we don't get lost in the weeds?
Absolutely. When you distill all the data, there are basically three core takeaways you need to understand.
Okay, let's hear them.
Number one, we are witnessing a split financial world. We are seeing the fragmentation of global trade happening in real time. For decades, we had one unified global standard where everyone used the U.S. dollar and followed the exact same banking rules.
Right.
Now we are heading toward a dual system, a U.S. dollar-based system and a separate Chinese-backed system.
And for a small business owner, that split means immediate friction.
Yes, tons of it.
It means higher shipping, compliance, and insurance costs for literally everything you buy or sell, because international companies suddenly have to navigate two completely different sets of rules depending on where a cargo ship is going.
That's exactly right. And that friction creates inflation. Which leads me to number two. Not all companies are equal in this fight.
What do you mean by that?
Inside China, the economic fallout is going to be incredibly uneven. Massive, globally connected companies like Hengli face huge existential risks because they desperately need access to international markets.
Right, they can't afford to get locked out.
Meanwhile, those smaller teapot refiners are struggling just to survive the squeeze on their profit margins. And in the banking sector, state-backed Chinese banks might actually thrive by monopolizing this sanctioned business.
While the private banks suffer.
Exactly. Private banks will suffer as they flee from the risk of U.S. penalties. So basically, state power grows and private power shrinks.
Got it. And the third takeaway.
Number 3, the hunt for new oil. Because of this massive pressure in the Middle East, China is rapidly securing alternative sources of energy. The trade data shows that by April 30th, a staggering 62% of Brazil's Petrobras exports were heading straight to China.
Brazil? Wait, 62% of their exports? That is a massive rewiring of global shipping routes.
It is a total realignment. So, ironically, while the United States and China are locked in this intense fight over Middle Eastern logistics, countries in South America, like Brazil or nations like Russia, could become the structural, long-term winners of this dispute.
Wow, just by sitting back and selling oil.
Exactly. They are simply stepping into the void to supply China's massive energy needs while the superpowers fight it out.
That is a brilliant breakdown. I think the real lesson here for you listening is to fundamentally change how you consume the news.
I agree completely.
When you hear about global economics, you have to look past the physical product. Don't just watch the oil barrels or the cargo ships. Watch the invisible plumbing.
Watch the compliance officers at the banks.
Yes. Watch the compliance officers, watch the insurance underwriters, and watch the obscure legal codes. Because the paperwork is where the real power is actually being contested.
And that leads to a much larger, frankly provocative question. A question that goes far beyond just the month of May 2026.
Oh, yeah. Let's hear it.
If we assume that countries like China are actually successful, like if they manage to navigate this crisis and spend the next decade building completely separate legal and banking systems just to bypass U.S. secondary sanctions.
That happens to the world we know.
Exactly. What happens to the everyday value and power of the U.S. dollar in our normal lives 10 years from now?
That's a huge thought.
If the global economy doesn't structurally need the U.S. dollar to buy and sell oil, the entire foundation of global finance shifts beneath our feet.
Which brings us right back to the mechanics of that trap. If one of those interlocking gears figures out how to detach and build an entirely new machine, the old machine simply stops working. It's a fascinating, terrifying, and deeply complex puzzle that is going to affect us all. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.